Uh, we are very excited to have you to this event. We would like to discuss this important topic for next 3.5 hours into the next key topics we will cover it. First, before the beginning, I would like to invite our Senior Director of the ADB, Mr. Toru Kubo, for his opening remarks. Toru, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jinsun. Distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome again to the 20th anniversary of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, day 2. It is a great honor to open today's deep dive workshop on resilient energy systems. This is actually quite special and personal. So I'm one of the very few and quite frankly, old ones who have never missed a single edition of ACEF. So it's been 20 years and the ACEF has really evolved, and I see that. I saw that with my own eyes. As the name suggests, it's really focused on clean energy and driving forward the low carbon transition and enhancing energy security across our development member countries through scale-up of renewable energy storage and energy efficiency. A few years ago, thanks to my colleagues here from the fantastic climate adaptation team, so Orgo is there, Sugar, who's been driving the team for a long time, and of course Jingsun and many others, we started to discuss about energy system vulnerability and resilience. Now, this is more pressing than ever. With no disrespect to the parallel sessions and the esteemed speakers, you all made the right choice this morning. 2024 was the hottest year on record. Many of you have seen that, read that. But this is not just a record. We have reached and exceeded a threshold that is redefining the conditions under which our infrastructure, our economies, and communities must function. It's literally material. Our rail tracks are bulging, they're buckling, our road surfaces are melting, and our bridges, the beams, are swelling. It's causing real safety concerns. And you've seen across the world interruptions. Our flood protection systems are overwhelmed with the rapidly melting glaciers and unprecedented torrential rain due to significantly higher levels of moisture held by the warmer atmosphere. As you all know, 1 degree warmer air can hold approximately 7% more moisture. So what is that? 4 to 6 degrees, that's 30 to 40% more moisture. Our systems are not designed to handle that. Now, in the energy sector, the impacts of extreme weather events is already evident. The Asia and Pacific region, home to more than half of the world's population, is on the front lines. The region is warming faster than the global average and already witnessing the devastating toll on energy systems. In October 2023, a massive glacial lake outburst flood led to the collapse of the 1.2 gigawatt Teesta 3 hydroelectric dam in India. The disaster caused more than 100 deaths and the evacuation of over 4,500 people. In Lao PDR, the capital city Vientiane suffered multiple power outages between April and May last year. Amid an unprecedented heat wave, surging electricity demand and the overheating of electrical systems crippled service delivery, affecting homes, businesses, and hospitals. You know where I'm going and the rest and this session, right? It's beyond energy systems. It really affects across the economy and services. And just months later, in October last year, Tropical Storm Christine struck the Philippines, disrupting electricity supply to over 970,000 customers, with cascading effects on public services, food supply, and safety. And as you know, these are not outliers. They are part of a growing trend. Every component of the energy chain, from fuel extraction, power generation or fuel refining, transmission or transport, distribution, and to the demand side, is exposed to increasing risk. Importantly, our economies are more dependent than ever on energy services. Our industries, the digital economy, the e-mobility revolution, education, health, and other social services now depend heavily on reliable energy and power supply. Without urgent and coordinated action, climate-driven disruptions will deepen energy insecurity, stall development progress, and increase vulnerability across the region. We collectively have the power to turn this around. Investing in resilient energy systems can offer transformative benefits. Resilience protects energy suppliers from costly damage and service interruptions, and of course, financial penalties. It empowers governments and economies to enhance energy security, manage disaster risks, and accelerate the clean energy transition. It protects consumers, particularly the most vulnerable. And resilience reduces risks to businesses, catalyzing innovation and growth. The economic case is strong in just a few examples. In Bangladesh, an investment of 560 million in flood protection for power systems could prevent future losses of $1.6 billion, so that's 3 times. In the broader Asia-Pacific region, improved cooling access in the face of extreme heat waves could prevent GDP losses projected to reach 3.3% by 2070. Yet, significant barriers remain. Access to reliable and localized climate data for energy planning is still limited. Now, importantly, engineers and planners still look backwards, right, when making projections and deciding on design and materials. How many are engineers here? Energy planners. I'm also an engineer, thermal engineer. It's very true. We do look backwards, right? And this, unfortunately, does not work anymore. And energy planners need to seek out for and demand for more robust climate scenarios. National strategies on climate change often emphasize mitigation opportunities for the energy sector while overlooking the urgent need for adaptation. Financing for energy sector resilience remains insufficient, and the uptake of proven technologies such as smart grids and efficient cooling systems lags behind. This must change. You're all making efforts here, but hopefully we can use today's workshop. It's not just a dialogue. It is really a call to scale up action. We must collectively work to build capacity for effective use of climate information, accelerate deployment of innovative technologies, and they're proven technologies too. So we're not just looking at cutting edge. Mobilize greater investment for resilience, and integrate climate resilience thinking into energy planning and policy. The cost of inaction is rising. Fortunately, as I mentioned, there are great examples of leaders taking action, and we are joined today by such leaders from governments, international organizations, research institutions, and of course, the private sector. So let us use this workshop, learn from each other, develop concrete strategies, and implement collaborative solutions. We must rapidly scale up action to match the scale, magnitude, and the urgency of the challenges ahead of us towards a more resilient energy future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toru. We will now follow on a very short briefing presentation to understand what kind of topics we are going to discuss today. So, Hello, my name is Jin Sun Lim. I'm climate change specialist at the ADB. And using this moment, I would like to introduce some of the interesting figures so that you can think about these important issues from the different angles. The first figure is from the IPCC AR6 report. And as Toro mentioned, that every segment of the energy value chain, they are affected by the climate impact driver, they call it, by IPCC. For instance, fuel supply, floods, droughts, and wildfires can negatively affect the biofuel production or critical minerals mining and others. And of course, some of the coastal refineries and fuel production sites, they are also vulnerable to the storm surges or sea level rise. Electricity generation, it's not only about the renewable energy, which are known to be sensitive, comparatively sensitive to the climate impacts, but also at the same time, conventional thermal power plants, they are affected by the extreme weather events because they are relying on the cooling from the water or air cooling, which is affecting their efficiency as well. And electricity transmission distribution, is one of the most vulnerable segments of the energy value chain. In extreme weather events, they are testing the physical resilience of these uh, electricity transmission and distribution networks. And of course, we can imagine the energy demand is rapidly growing for cooling, and also in some area as the droughts are really increasing rapidly. So they are choosing more energy intensive water supply options like desalination or deep water pumping. So this one is one of the examples from the International Energy Agency's research on the Southeast Asia energy outlook, which was published the last year. So as you can see on the figure on your left side about the heat waves and temperature and how much refineries and power plants, they are exposed to certain such kind of threats by the middle of this century. And the right side is about the changes in precipitation and flood risks as well. This figure is, as you can see, that it's only about the exposure to the tropical cyclones. And you can see that the world average to the exposure to the tropical cyclones are much lower than the Southeast Asian average. They are usually ranging from 10 to 20% in terms of the exposure level, but half of the hydropower or solar PV panels installed in the Southeast Asia, they are exposed to the tropical cyclone, and some of them, they are really facing increasing concern of very intense tropical cyclones as well. So the next part is about the cooling demand. So as Toro mentioned in the opening remarks, so the cooling demand is rapidly increasing in the Asia Pacific, and this one can affect the GDP losses in these countries and interfering their economic and social development pathways. This is a graph is showing the cooling demand increase, estimated cooling demand increases up to 2070 from the ADB's climate report. The last slide I would like to share is that we need more actions, and very surprisingly, the energy sector has been really neglected or ignored in terms of the adaptation and resilience efforts. In all the NDCs, all the submitted NDC, 95% of the NDCs, they are choosing energy sector as a mitigation priority. But shockingly, in their adaptation priority, only 41% of the all submitted NDCs across the world, they are choosing energy sector as one of the priority. So we conducted, again, scoping down the research to the Asia Pacific level. And as you can see on your right side, out of 41 ADB DMCs, 17 countries, they chose energy sector as an adaptation priority, which is actually exactly 41%, the same level of the world average. And then also among the 17 countries which has submitted the national adaptation plan, 10 countries chose the energy sector as one of their adaptation priority. Actually, this one is higher than the world average. And there are multiple benefits of enhancing climate resilience of energy systems. So our speakers, our very distinguished and very outstanding speakers will talk about all these kind of benefits as well. And um, resilient energy systems, they are contributing to the energy security by reducing the disruptions from the extreme weather events. Of course, they are contributing the enhanced energy access by integrating climate resilience consideration into their newly designed energy infrastructure. And also it contributes to the energy transition by ensuring the climate sensitive renewable energy technologies can operate and endure any kind of potential climate driven disruptions. And also it contributes to economic development and social welfare by providing consistent and reliable energy supplies. It is also contributing to the disaster risk management by absorbing and anticipating potential impacts from the nature disasters which is caused by extreme weather events. So today's session, we will have 4 different sessions in this workshop. So each session will discuss about the first session, we will answer the question, are extreme weather events an increasing concern? So we will listen to very scientific, strong evidences and analysis about extreme weather events impacts. And the discussion 2, we will listen to how do extreme weather events affect energy systems in particular. Then we will have a 30-minute break. It will be followed by more solution-oriented thoughts from different speakers. So discussion 3 will be about how can we strengthen resilience through investment in systemic changes. And the 4th session will be about how can policies and capacity building activities support building resilient energy systems. So each session, after giving the presentation, there will be opportunity to all of you to ask questions, and we really appreciate your interactive participation in this session. So please feel free to raise your questions and also comments as well. So now I would like to invite our speakers to the stage for the group photo. And after the group photo, we will follow up by the panel discussion. So please quickly join to the stage, all the speakers, please. Thank you very much, all the speakers and also the participants for your patience. And now we will start the first panel discussion about the scientific approach about understanding the extreme weather events impacts on the energy system. So we have 2 prominent speakers here. So I would like to introduce the 2 distinguished speakers for this session. So first, Dr. Michiya Hayashi is the senior researcher of National Institute for Environmental Studies of Japan. He's an expert of multi-scale tropical variability, analyzing the dynamics of the El Nino Southern Oscillation and its change under multiple climate scenarios. Thank you for joining. And Dr. Madhurima Swice-Good is Deputy Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction of UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCO. And she is in charge of policy and research analysis in anticipatory actions for climate change, disaster risk reduction, and capacity development. First, I would like to invite Dr. Michiya Hayashi to begin the session. So he will share insights from his research on the global trends of extreme weather events. Michiya, floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Michiya Hayashi, and I'm from National Institute for Environmental Studies in Japan. Thank you for your introduction, Jinsun. I am not a clean energy expert, and I think I am too young and I am too casual to be here, but I work on the climate side. So the climate side that shows, okay. Climate research is showing us why clean energy is so urgent. So I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about how extreme weather events are changing in our warming climate. Let's begin with a famous observation. This is a famous figure of warming stripes, which shows the global mean annual temperature from cool blues in the past and to deep reds in recent years. Importantly, the pace of warming has accelerated, especially over the last few decades. The IPCC shows that it is warming almost everywhere, with the strongest warming observed in the higher latitudes and over land areas we live. And here is a clear message from IPCC AR6 report. Human influence on the climate system is unequivocal. We know this from numerical simulations. For example, we can compare what actually happened in the factual world with the counterfactual world where human-induced climate change did not occur. This provides strong evidence that human influence is the main driver of climate change we face. And it's already affecting extreme weather events like heat waves, heavy rainfall, droughts in all regions of the world. Now, we have scientific tools to ask a question, which is often asked: did climate change make this event more likely or more severe? This approach is called event attribution. Very recently, a Weather Attribution Center Japan was established to inform the public. They utilized this approach to assess extreme weather events such as heat waves and heavy rainfalls. By comparing factual and counterfactual worlds, we can estimate how much climate change has increased the risk of specific events. This slide summarizes recent examples of extreme weather events around the world. For example, there were wildfires across Europe, severe drought in Nevada, US, and also there was heavy rainfall in Japan in 2023 in Fukuoka Prefecture, where I lived for 6 years. And also, in a large area of South Asia, there were flooding last year. And also, in last year, there was strong and frequent typhoon impact in the Philippines here. Scientific studies increasingly show that global warming is making such events more intense and more frequent. In many cases, climate change is turning natural hazards into disasters. This is based on projection reported in IPCC. Future changes in temperature, both average and extremes, tend to increase together. So as the average temperature increases, heat waves also become more frequent and intense. But for precipitation, the picture is much more complicated. average rainfall may increase or decrease depending on the region, while extreme rainfall events are projected to increase almost everywhere, because the heavy rainfall is more sensitive to the increase of the humid moisture in the atmosphere. Actually, in recent years, we have seen a clear increase in extreme weather events. Extreme heat is rising almost everywhere, and the influence of human activity is now well detected. For extreme rainfall and drought, the signal is not always strong enough to isolate human impact in every region because of the huge noise. But overall, the increase in these events is clear across many parts of the world. In short, climate change is already reshaping the frequency and severity of weather extremes. Let's go back to this figure. Global warming has not allowed a perfectly steady path. There is natural climate fluctuations over decades that causes temporary pauses and accelerations in global warming. And also, year-to-year fluctuations lead to record-breaking extreme warm years like the last 2 years. These multi-scale variations combined with human-caused warming shapes the climate risks we face. Natural variability matters. Natural fluctuations such as Pacific decadal oscillation, according to one of the studies, are big enough to overwhelm the steady background warming at any point in time. For example, the phase of the PDO index were corresponding to the pause and acceleration of the warming of the global temperature. Also, El Nino Southern Oscillation, which have the year-to-year variation of the sea surface temperature in Eastern Pacific Ocean, is important to explain the spikes of the warming together with the long-term change of the temperature. El Nino often results in record-shattering global temperature by warming the tropical troposphere by releasing the heat from the ocean in the tropical Pacific Ocean. Including the last 2 years, El Nino did some work to warm up the world. The El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, is intensifying. After the 1960s, we have seen more frequent and stronger warm El Nino and cold La Nina events. There is growing evidence that human activities may have already influenced the variability of ENSO, and climate models projection indicates that the ENSO amplification will continue to the end of the 21st century. I'm not going to explain the detailed mechanism, but one of the research indicates that both greenhouse gases and air pollution increase may contribute to increased ENSO variability. ENSO variability change is important because a stronger ENSO can increase risks far beyond the tropical Pacific, impacting infrastructure, energy resources, economics, and so forth. Okay, this is the last slide, not the last one, but let me talk about the economy. One of the studies indicates that the amplified ENSO could cost the world economy of 84 trillion US dollars this century, even under current mitigation pledges. While the exact number is still uncertain, the economic risk is real and significant. So to summarize, human-caused climate change is already influencing extreme weather events, and natural variability such as El Nino Southern Oscillation is changing and becoming stronger to the end of the 21st century. So we must prepare not only for the global warming itself, but also for climate variability changes as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michiya, for your very informative presentation. Now, I would like to invite Madhurima to understand a regional perspective. So she will share ASCAP's work on developing digital tools for climate risk and resilience analytics in Asia Pacific. Actually, this is one of my favorite tools, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinsen. I'm going to step out here because I'm very short, so people can't see me. So thank you, Jinsen and Doctor, because what you really laid out sort of the overview on why it is so important for especially the Asia Pacific region to have information in climate sensitive sectors, particularly like energy. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the risk portion, but also about the solutions portion, and I know that's going to come later, but also how can we address some of these issues through new digital tools that are available to us. So I'm not going too much on this because I think this has already been discussed. But you know, ADB last year came out with a report on disasters and energy systems, really talking about the fact that the Asia Pacific region is actually much more attuned to disasters than the rest of the world, and I think you showed in that presentation too. We did this analysis from the IPCC reports looking at the number of heat days increase, and as you can see, under the different scenarios, emission scenarios, it is really projected to increase. So particularly heat waves, as has already been talking about, you know, it's not just an infrastructure issue, it's a systemic issue. Thank you. So what do we do for the Asia Pacific? We have the Asia Pacific Risk and Resilience Portal. This portal is really to translate these global climate and weather scenarios to the Asia Pacific region. So this is where we started out. We tried to see how we could translate these global climate changes, these long-term climate changes to the Asia Pacific region. And now what we're trying to do is, particularly for sectoral work, how do we take these climate scenarios and translate them at the country level so that sectors might be able to use it. So as you can see, this is an example from Mongolia. The IPCC, we downscaled the IPCC data sets to Mongolia, and now we're overlaying sector information like energy power plants to show where the exposure and the risk will be in the future. So this is just the data architecture of the portal. We have hazard and climate data that is, we get them from NASA, anything that is available for online. Then we have our socioeconomic data, which we gather from ESCAP, UNDP, ADB, and then we create products. So I'll show you two of these products today to really look at the forecasting this for early warning. So one of the key sectors that we have been working in is the energy sector. On the portal, you'll see, for example, you can look at flooding, where flooding will be under a 2-degree climate scenario, or a heat wave, where heat waves will shift under 2-degree climate scenarios. Then overlay the power plants, and this can show you where not only is the exposure to current power plants, but where you might need to build future energy systems that will adapt to that changing climate. Like I said, now what we're starting to do is really looking at how to downscale these global climate data sets. So if you look at the global climate data sets, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, these are at 100 by 100 kilometer resolution, which for some sectoral work is not enough. You really need to downscale these to really look at sectoral work. So what we've been doing with NIES actually is getting a methodology for statistical downscaling. We've started this in Bhutan, so as you can see, this is 1 by 1 kilometer downscaling of the models. So in Bhutan, it helps us really understand, for example, where hydropower should be located, because in Bhutan, we saw that there's a shift in temperature increase to potentially where planned hydropower would be in 2070. So in Maldives, for example, we've been doing similar work. And here, as you can see, we look at how much exposure or where the exposure of energy infrastructure will be under various atolls. And so you can really now start to see how to plan, as I think our previous speaker mentioned, how you can plan your energy infrastructure to be in line and adapt to the changing climate. We've been doing this work now. We started out in Bhutan and Maldives, and now we're doing this work in other countries as well, such as Mongolia, Tajikistan, as well as Bhutan and Nepal. The second thing that I wanted to quickly share is a tool called the Automated Impact-Based Forecasting Tool. And this is really our support for the early warning initiative of the Secretary General. So using this tool, we can really now look at sectoral impacts and where these, so for example, what we do is this tool is based on machine learning, and we have user inputs. This can be a hazard data, let's say seasonal forecasting data, or we also can have user inputs in there. So we overlay that with socio-economic population infrastructure data to really show what, not just what the weather will be, but really what is the weather going to do to sectors. So for example, this is what it shows for the current Southeast Asia seasonal forecast for the last season, the January, February, March season. And here you can see what is the power plant exposure in Southeast Asia, for example, and where it's most exposed. And like I said, this is at the country level, and with the downscaling work, we can even do this at the subnational level. So I will stop there, but I would love to discuss more on this, these tools that we have on our portal. It is available to everybody, so I think this is a way for us to really bring together that climate scenarios that I think Mr. Toro was talking about this morning, along with the sectoral work that everybody here is doing, and to see how really we can build these resilient systems, not just for today, but for long term. So I will stop there. Thank you very much, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Madhu. So we would like to open the floor for any kind of questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. There is a person who is roaming the microphone to you. When you are asking the question, could you introduce yourself briefly? And if there is any kind of specific question to a specific speaker, please let us know.
Hello everyone, my name is Khubeb and I am working for a Chinese solar energy company, YC Solar. Recently we had some interaction with our clients, and they said something about the products, that are you considering climate change into the design of your products? For example, there's frequent hailstorms in some areas, and they're asking if our products are prone to damage from that, or are we doing something to incorporate that? So Madhuri, I would like to ask you if the tool you're using, we can use that to um, develop specific products for specific regions, depending on the type of exposure to the climate change they're experiencing in the future.
Thank you very much for the question. Is there any other question? Yes. We will collect 2 more questions and we will go back to the panel.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that excellent talk. Kyle Dada with Teneo. 90% of the resilience events in the electrical system are actually from the distribution or the transmission system. It's the grid, not the generation. So are there plans in this model that you developed to add 2 things? One is, of course, a sense of the distribution and, more importantly, the transmission exposure. And then secondly, a lot of the events are caused by wind or wind-related storms. Is there a plan to add some of those issues, such as hurricane tracks or the like, so that you can see where the exposures are against the grid? Because that would be tremendously valuable for this kind of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dan Millison. I'm a part-time consultant for ADB and one of the old timers that Toru didn't mention. I have a comment. I'm going to answer his question first, and then I have a question. Okay, so commercial insurance is available. The first utility scale solar project that ADB ever financed was in Thailand. Private sector deal, financed and approved in 2010, 45 megawatt thin film plant. It got wiped out by a flood the year after it was constructed. They had insurance to cover it. The plant got rebuilt. But since you asked the question, it seems to me that there's an obvious opportunity here for ADB to work with the insurance and reinsurance businesses, which I hear from time to time say they're interested in doing this. So what's ADB doing, if anything? And this seems to me like an obvious way for ADB to mobilize a lot more commercial financing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Maybe the first 2 questions relate to the solar and grid installation and operation. Maybe Madhu, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. I think both the questions really kind of nip at that specific issue of data, right? One of the key things that we've found, especially with energy sector, is that sometimes this data is very sensitive. So whatever that we find in the resources that are available to us, for example, there is energy grid data that has been available through UNDP. We actually have all of that on the portal. So at the regional level, we have some sort of transmission grid that we can look at. But like I said, when you go into the countries and you want to do this work at the subnational level, I think the issue sometimes is the data. But we have been working with, let's say, for example, Maldives, where now in the portal, there's 2, one that is open to public and one that is closed, where the NDMA hosts that side of the portal. And so they have their own data sets uploaded in there to do the work, but it's not open. But on the portal itself, we have open source, all the open source data that we can find. So, I mean, please take a look. And if you're working in a country and we can gather that information, we'd be happy to see how to put that into the portal as well. And just, I think going back to the issue of, climate change and understanding, sorts of materials, I think that's where this is really important, because as we know, past events and past systems are not going to be enough to really predict what is going to be happening in the future. Because, as Dr. mentioned, that the variability is going to raise uncertainties. So I think one of the key issues then is to understand these climate scenarios and prepare these scenarios, right? Depending on your emissions, depending on where the socioeconomic pathways are going to go, prepare the different scenarios and maybe, different materials for different scenarios. So we have this data available, how the climate is changing, where the energy data is, where the energy plants are currently, but what can you do for the future? And that's where we go to countries and say, if you have planned energy data sets, perhaps, you can even overlay on these climate models and really see where your risk infrastructure would be.
Thank you, Mario. And Michia, do you want to add anything?
Yes. So climate projection is highly uncertain, and it is because of the climate model difference, and also, as Mother said, scenario differences. And what I wanted to say is that yeah. So, but there is some significant signal of the climate change, like the wind speed is changing. For example, because of the Arctic amplification, where there is a faster warming in the northern hemisphere, so the temperature gradient of the mid-latitude is changing, so it reducing the amplitude of storm track, which have the strongest wind. So the solar wind power energy potential is changing globally. And one of the studies is saying that in the southern hemisphere, the wind is actually increasing to have more potential energy. So the change of the infrastructure should be depending on the region. And we need to increase the scientific evidence to extract the significant signal from the uncertain data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, our next session will also discuss about climate extreme weather events, impacts on the power generation and power grids. So also next speakers will be able to provide some answers to your questions. And also related to investment, we are actually, ADB is working very hard to scale up more public and private financing for the more climate resilient energy systems as well. And as you mentioned, the insurance work, there is some kind of technical studies going on about the disaster risk reduction insurance as well. And actually this kind of investment strategy will be also discussed in our session 3. So you will be able to hear more insights from our distinguished guests. Thank you very much for joining this panel. Please give a big hand to these two speakers. Now we are moving to the next discussion on how do extreme weather events affect energy system resilience. I would like to invite the two speakers on the stage. First, Dr. Henri Payet is the head of the Planning and Economic Studies section of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In this position, he leads the agency's analytical work on the economics and financing of nuclear power, its contribution to sustainable development and climate change mitigation, as well as IAEA's capacity support in energy planning. I also would like to invite Mr. Will Smith. He is a regional manager for India and Southeast Asia of EPRI, where he serves as the primary relationship manager for EPRI's members across the region, focusing on delivering cutting-edge research, technology, and services. In this role, he is also responsible for developing strategic partnerships and identifying collaborative opportunities with regional stakeholders. So I would like to invite Dr. Henri Payet to begin the session. He will share his recent findings on the impacts of extreme weather events on electricity generation using a case of nuclear power. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Jinsoon, and thank you for inviting the International Atomic Energy Agency to this discussion. nuclear was mentioned yesterday in the plenary session, and it is responsible for generating about a quarter of the world's low carbon electricity. So in the discussion on clean energy transitions, it is also interesting to discuss how weather and extreme weather events can impact nuclear generation. So this is work that we are doing at the International Atomic Energy Agency. As Jin-Soon said in her introduction, my section is looking both at energy planning, but also at analysis in terms of mitigation, in terms of climate resilience, and we're looking also at adaptation measures that are being taken by the nuclear industry to adapt to extreme weather events. We're very lucky at the IAEA to have a database, and the previous speakers really highlighted the importance of data, weather data. We have operational data for nuclear power plants in the world, and I think that's a very important source of information to analyze the impact of events on a specific technology. So our database is called PRIS. It's the Power Reactor Information System, and it's also available publicly. And it contains operational data for all the nuclear reactors in the world. So just to follow up on the first sessions, it is clear that there is an impact of climate change on the energy sector, and in the case of generation, we see the impact of rising temperatures that can affect cooling processes for thermal power plants, including nuclear power plants, hydropower potential, and also the grid, impact on the grid that was highlighted in a question as well. Sea level rise can affect coastal facilities. We see also effect on wind potential, and just also to highlight, and I think it was also quite clear in the first session, that the vulnerability of infrastructures, including energy infrastructures, is very dependent on location. In terms of nuclear power plant, if you look at the chart on the bottom right of the screen, you will see energy losses related to weather events for different types of nuclear power plants, those that are located on rivers, those that are located on lakes, and on sea. And you can see that around, well, about 20 years ago, we could see significant impacts of climate events on river-based nuclear power plants. And that's linked to heat waves or droughts affecting the cooling capabilities on rivers. But we've seen that the energy losses have decreased, and that suggests that there are adaptation measures taken by the industry to improve cooling systems, to improve water intake, while respecting regulations in terms of environmental impacts. So just a brief slide on nuclear energy in the world. There are 31 countries that are operating nuclear power plants, about 32, 34 newcomer countries, including many countries in this part of the world. And you see that quite a significant number of countries in ADB are also looking at operating nuclear power or looking at nuclear power plant options. So I emphasized the importance of data. So we've analyzed the data and especially loss of generation due to adverse weather events. We always see a lot of media attention on the impact of heat waves on nuclear generation. Actually, the total energy loss is quite small, about 0.3% in 2022 of the generation was lost due to weather-related events. We also looked at, that was in one of the initial charts, what type of cooling, and you see that river-based plants are mostly affected due to, I would say, to the thermal effects on rivers. One point that I would like to make also is that there are a lot of environmental regulations in terms of water intake and heat releases in rivers. And what we're observing is that increasingly the thresholds are reached even before the thermal power plants, so upstream of the thermal power plants. Well, this is a clear effect of the warming of our climate that was highlighted in the first presentations. I mentioned that we see evidence of adaptation, so maybe this is anticipating on the next sessions. But two types of adaptation measures that are being considered in the nuclear industry. One are more technical in terms of equipment, these water withdrawal systems, heat exchangers, more high performance heat exchangers, for example, can be used. But also there are management, fleet management measures that have been taken. For example, organize the regularly planned outages, for example, for river-based nuclear power plants, do the outages in the middle of summer, so that there at least the impact is less on the energy system. One point that we've also discussed with a number of utilities is this drive for adaptation. There is this kind of balance between the cost of adaptation measures, the investments needed to improve the resilience of the plants, and the return, the economic return, the sale of electricity that you would get from doing the investment. And here it becomes an economic question. It becomes a discussion on the way energy systems are designed, the cost of the wholesale prices of electricity. And we have seen, at least in Europe, that when electricity prices are low, there is less of an incentive for utilities to invest. So maybe that's an area where governments could play a role by incentivizing investments in building resilience. So I think this is my last slide, just to highlight that there are technical strategies, financial strategies that need to be taken to improve the resilience of energy systems. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to questions later on.
Thank you very much, Hangmi. So now I will hand it over to Will. He will share his insights from electricity grid resilience perspective. Floor is yours, Will. Technical team, could you show up the slides of Will?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and get started. While we're waiting, thank you, Jinsun. Thank you, ADB. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. My name is Will Smith. I'm the regional manager for India and Southeast Asia at EPRI. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know EPRI, we are a global energy R&D organization. We work in about 50 different countries across 450 different entities, doing applied R&D on how we make, move, and use electricity. So all types of generation, transmission, distribution, and uses as well. We're a societal nonprofit, so everything we do needs to be for societal benefit. And so 3 years ago, EPRI launched the Climate Ready Initiative, which I think is really just a great encapsulation of a lot of the global work that we're doing at EPRI. It was designed to put together a common framework that's comprehensive, consistent, and collaborative to create a framework to address physical climate risk to the power system. So we looked at it from 3 separate approaches, the first of which is physical climate data. So taking a look at how good is the climate data that's out there? How do we downscale it? How do we localize it? How do we make it suitable for power system uses? How do we deal with issues of data rich versus data poor? And then moving it on to the power system. So once we know what our best guess at what the climate future could be, how will our current assets adapt to that climate future? But also as we're thinking about bringing new assets online. So we know that there's going to need to be a tremendous amount of build out to address a lot of the demand going forward. So assets that are coming online in 2025 that might still be, in operation in 2075, 2080, how are they going to be able to operate reliably in that climate future? And then the final piece is just taking both of those two elements together. Once you have the data on the climate side and the asset vulnerability side, how do you start to quantify some decisions, make investment prioritizations, things of that nature? So we have a wealth of information that I'd welcome folks to check out. And so there were kind of 3 core reasons why we opted to pursue this work. It's a little bit out of EPRI's general swim lane. The primary reason was, so in 2020, our modeling showed that electricity as final energy was projected to increase pretty dramatically. This is pre-ChatGPT. This is pre the AI demand surge that has happened in the US. So we're seeing, in order to meet decarbonization goals, we're going to need electricity to become a significantly greater amount of final energy, but also we're seeing this dramatic energy demand growth now, not only in the US, but around the world. Obviously, ADB says that 2/3 of energy demand will be coming from Southeast Asia between now and 2040. So a tremendous amount of demand, but also a lot of what's going to meet that demand is going to be renewables. So not only are we more reliant on the grid than ever to power our daily lives, but a lot of those assets are aging, and a lot of the grid going forward will be weather dependent, which just makes resilient that much more critical. And we already know from lived experience that this is happening. So EPRI partnered with NOAA, which is a government agency in the US, to look at, to help inform a lot of our research. And so NOAA does a tallying of billion-dollar disasters that affect US infrastructure every year. If you were to average from 1980 when they started to 2024, they would average about 8 per year. But if you just look at 2019 to 2024, that average jumps to 20. So we already know that extreme weather is impacting our grid and just increasingly drives home the need for resilience. And we know that this is not happening in a vacuum. So each part of the energy system is vulnerable to climate change. There are cascading impacts that can occur based on that interconnection. Henri did a fantastic job covering things from the generation sector, but obviously the grid isn't happening in a vacuum. Climate change is impacting all parts of the energy system. And I'll very just quickly show, this is one deliverable that just shows that, right as we were starting out this work, it became very clear to us that proactive adaptation is consistently less expensive than respond and repair, and then just, continuing to drive home that need to proactively harden and make your grid more resilient. So as Henri noted, heat is not just impacting the generation side, it also stresses the entire T&D system. When air is hotter, especially when wind is low, lines can't dissipate heat effectively. They sag, which increases the risk of contact with vegetation or other elements, and oftentimes grid operators need to curtail those assets. High temperatures can also accelerate equipment degradation. So overhead lines, underground cables, substations all have thermal operating limits. And when you're operating at or above those thermal limits, which is becoming more and more common, it can shorten the asset's life cycle. And you increasingly over time have a risk of a sudden failure. Heat rate also causes demand spikes. So we talked about in the previous slide that these things aren't happening in a vacuum. So as demand rises, as you have an extreme heat event, demand is going to rise. Our research shows that in extreme heat events, demand can rise in the form of cooling by upwards of 40%. And in the same time, lines can derate because of the heat by 6 to 10%. And that's a dangerous mismatch, which can lead to overheating, failures, and system overloads. And even if the grid is able to survive a certain one-off or a week-long heat event, that long-term damage to connectors, transformers, insulators wears on the system over time, wears on the asset over time, and that accumulates, slowly eroding the reliability of the asset, and again, just loading the dice that you could have a failure event. So Climate Ready, as part of our work, we've done detailed assessments of thermal ratings, asset loading, failure thresholds to help kind of control some of this risk. Moving over to high precipitation, flooding, typhoons, lightning events, major storms, which are all becoming more frequent here in the region. High winds from thunderstorms or other typhoons, other types of events can destroy overhead lines, they can topple poles, they can damage substation structures, and that's often overlooked. Currently is that today's system is often not designed for the type of intensity of wind that we're already seeing and these shifting storm tracks that we're seeing as well. So EPRI research shows that topography and local terrain is a major factor in terms of the resilience of these systems, and that's often missing from original design. That makes retrofitting and reinforcement essential. Flooding can compound these things as well, because you have erosion, which can not only make surrounding elements less stable, but the assets themselves less stable as well. When rainfall increases, substations and underground systems can be inundated, foundations can be destabilized, cables can be corroded, switching equipment can be deemed inoperable. Obviously, you can have DERs, which we're more consistently relying on, that can also be inundated. Battery storage systems can be inundated. Even equipment yards, which house excess equipment, can be flooded and impacted, and that can often delay repair and restoration times. We did a case study on Hurricane Florence, which impacted the Caribbean and Atlantic part of the United States in 2018, and we found that 9 substations and 1 power plant were submerged, not because they had poor design or design flaws or issues with things with that nature, but just because that their floodplains were no longer valid. And so EPRI, obviously here in this region, we have heavy rainfall, we're by the equator, we're seeing more and more storms, and we're just loading the dice that, as more and more of these weather events continue to happen, you're loading the dice, and there's greater chance of eventually there will be an impact to the system, whether it's an acute or a chronic issue. And so to handle some of this, Climate Ready has done some research on scenario modeling, geospatial mapping. So we have software and risk scoring that can help with some of this as well. And then finally, I'm glad I'm not the only one that worked in a couple of cheeky solutions. EPRI is a solutions-oriented entity. I know the solutions conversations will come later in the day, but we did do 3 years of work, and I just wanted to share a couple of the key takeaways. Number one being that data is critical. It's, both on the climate side, but also on the asset side. It's important that your climate scientists and your power systems engineers are able to speak the same language when you're having these conversations. Number two, you're only as strong as your neighbor. It's been fantastic over the first couple of days here to hear about the fantastic work that's going on in terms of integrating the grid here in the region, the interconnection work that's ongoing. You're only as strong as your neighbor. Extreme weather events are very rarely hyper-local, so your planning shouldn't be either. Number three is prioritization is a pivotal challenge. We have adaptation strategies available with us today that can rank stack versus affordability, reliability, efficiency. So having those conversations are very important, and to quantify those outcomes are key. Finally, uncertainty is not a license for inaction. We can't know when or where a certain weather impact will hit a certain part of the grid, but that's not a license to do nothing. We have the tools available to make least regret decisions, and we can't, we can't stand by, and we can't gold plate the system, and we can't do nothing either. So we need to be able to make informed decisions in order to strengthen the resilience of the grid where we can. So a lot to cover. There's a fantastic amount of information available on the Climate Ready website. Would strongly recommend folks take advantage of that. There's a wealth of information there, far more than I can cover in 8 minutes, which is probably turned into 9 minutes. Sorry, Jin-san. But thank you all for your time. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Now I'm open the floor to the audience. So if you want to raise any questions, please raise your hand.
I am from India, Delhi. We are in power distribution business. So we are talking a lot about climate impact. Uh, if we learn from the other segment, other sectors like metro, they have developed a metro tunnel under the old cities. Some of the 500-year-old building they cross below the surface. Likewise, in distribution or any other utility, the common challenge, apart from the impact of climate change like flooding, storm, heat waves, the other challenge is coexistence of all the utility. They are damaging asset of each other. So why can't we think about going below the ground, a independent structure or independent system where we can protect, we can shield ourselves from the climate impact, as well as make a robust infrastructure where the reliability will improve at the lower cost and for the long lasting impact will be sure. Is there any study or any project growing anywhere in the global, if anyone can share? That's just we want to know.
Thank you very much for your question. Are there any other questions? Any other participants who would like to? Please.
Okay, thank you. First, I'm Rocio from Rina Consulting, an Italian firm that offers consultancy services in all these kind of subjects. In particular, I mean, the main takeaway from both sessions, I think, is also the essential role that data take in the planning and in the adaptations measures. And regarding this, I have one question in particular. Regarding also, we are talking about also in specifically about urban resilience, talking about more than the 60% of the world live in cities. We also talked before about the issue of collecting data and get more specific data for planning these measures from cities, from the subnational level. So in this case, I wanted to ask you what kind of challenges you find inside your sectors in the nuclear energy power, but also in this, let's say, planning and this new tool that you presented also, Will. So that is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will hand it over to Will for the first question response and Henry for the second question.
Sure. So I think, ultimately you raised great points about, the holistic nature of these decisions. And, oftentimes you're thinking about resilience. You can't think about resilience in a vacuum because, yes, you're ranking investments in resilience against affordability, reliability, but you're also ranking it against the other things you mentioned. So it's a economy-wide considerations. You're thinking about mining, you're thinking about metals. Those are all different investment pathways that people can take. And so it's important that, that's part of the work that Climate Ready has done, is to quantify the benefits of resilience, because a lot of times, when you're talking about adaptation versus mitigation versus other ways that you can invest money, resilience is often at the bottom because there's no way to show that you've gotten that benefit unless there's an extreme weather event. And so it's critical to quantify some of that in order to, make investment prioritizations decisions. To your point about undergrounding, there have been studies that we've done that show that undergrounding can be effective in terms of hardening the grid. That being said, it is very expensive. In certain cases, it's cost prohibitive for a lot of utilities around the world. And then there's also the problem of, yes, you do have, some resilience based on the fact that that asset is underground. But ultimately, let's say that asset is running for 50 years, ultimately there will be issues. That's just, the law of averages, it'll happen eventually. And now that issue is underground. So you have to, get to that asset and fix it, which, can be costly as well. And so there are benefits in terms of, day-to-day resilience, but, if you do have challenges, there's still a tremendous cost associated with that. To the conversation about data, that was one of our biggest findings is that data is so critical, and there's only so much data out there as well, and there's also an issue with sharing data. So we were asked by a development organization to do a vulnerability assessment in a certain country that will remain nameless, and they wouldn't give us the data. So how are we supposed to do a vulnerability assessment if we don't have the data? Obviously, localized data is incredibly important. What we've found in Climate Ready is that there's a tremendous amount of benefit that AI and machine learning can now bring. And so you can use AI, you can use GIS, machine learning to generate synthetic data that's future looking. We had a conversation that people are always back looking, but now it does give you an opportunity to be forward looking. So for example, we used synthetic data to create forward looking data on the chance of tornado events in the Mideast of the US earlier this year, predominantly using AI and machine learning techniques to generate synthetic data, which, obviously there's still a degree of uncertainty there, but it does help, and a lot of those technologies are advancing very rapidly. So we're hopeful in the future that we can continue to lean on those.
Thank you very much, Will. Harry?
Sorry. For the second question, I think it's important to bring together climate data, generation data whenever it's available, as I would say, inputs to planning for the future energy systems. So this is a work that we're also doing at the International Atomic Energy Agency as part of our capacity building program in energy planning with a number of partners, including ADB. And what we're increasingly being asked to do as well is to take into account the nexus between climate, land use, energy and water. So we have this methodology called CLUE, and it's increasingly important to bring all these I would say components together. You cannot plan for the future energy system without looking at how what are the future water uses, how land use will be done also, because there's this competition between agriculture, energy, and urban development. So these are, I would say, important ingredients for planning for future energy systems. In the case of nuclear power generation, maybe I will add an additional point to my initial presentation. Is as you know, the nuclear power sector is heavily regulated, and our regulators are increasingly looking at climate change as part of the licensing process for siting, but also for assessing designs. And so this is a big change as well compared to maybe 10 years ago. So in his introductory remarks, Mr. Kuba said there's a tendency to look backwards, but in some sectors there's already, I would say, examples of looking in the future, and not just 10 years, but maybe in the nuclear sector, these are long-lived assets. So we have to look at 60, 70, 80 years into the future, looking at all the scenarios from IPCC to assess what would be the potential flood risk, wind risk, and so on. So that's also, I mean, part of the planning process is to look at these aspects from a regulatory point of view.
Thank you very much for both of you for the wonderful presentation and responses. So we will have a short break from now on until 11, and from the 11 to 12:30, we will have two more sessions. One session more about the investments, and the second session will be more about the policies and also capacity building. These two sessions will give you more insights about more solutions, and that will be moderated by Mr. Argo Singh Roy, the Director of the Climate Change, who is sitting there, and which will be also followed by the closing remark of our Director of Climate Change, Noel O'Brien. So thank you very much for joining, and please come back here at 11. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We will soon start the session. So the speakers for the session 3, please come up to the stage and take a seat on the stage, please. Thank you very much, everyone. Our session 3 will start shortly. I would like to introduce the next 2 sessions moderator, Mr. Argo Singh Roy, the Director of the Climate Change of ADB.
Thank you. This is the first ever session I'm attending is running ahead of time, which is great. It's fantastic. And as we heard from Toru, this is the most exciting session. So all thanks to Jinsun actually for organizing it. I'll go and sit there very soon, but just a couple of points. So we heard in the morning, I think the case was quite loud and clear for the importance of looking at climate risk and adaptation in the context of energy sector investments. We also started hearing about some of the solutions from the panelists, where the solutions around siting, solutions around technology, around insurance products, around looking at management solutions also. And in this session, for the next half an hour, 40 minutes, we'll deep dive to really understand what are the solutions available within the energy sector to build resilience. I do want to frame the discussion slightly differently. I think we've been talking a lot about how do you make sure energy sector assets are resilient, which is of course very important, and we should be doing it, and we'll hear more. I also want to ask the panelists, who I'll introduce soon, on trying to help unpack how can investments in energy sector make a wider system more resilient? Because at the end of the day, whether it's schools or hospitals or MSMEs, they all depend on energy sector. So how can energy sector investments can help a system make more resilient to impacts of climate change? It'd be good to keep that framing in mind. With that, I'll briefly introduce, we've got 3 very exciting speakers. I've got my colleague, Len George, who's a principal energy specialist at ADB. We're very happy to have Selena Lee, from energy sector specialist from World Bank, join us. Thanks, Selena, for coming all the way from DC. And we also have Jan Chan, who's the Australasia Energy Transmission and Distribution Technical Lead at Arup. Thanks for bringing the private sector perspective. I'm supposed to go and sit over there, but I'll ask request Len to come and make a brief presentation about his topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Argo. Hello, everyone. I'm Len. I'm part of ADB's energy sector group. What I'll do today is take you through one of our projects that have been recently approved. This is in the Pacific, in the Northern Pacific, in the Federated States of Micronesia, where we have the Climate Resilient Energy and Water Sector project. So very briefly, for those of you who are not particularly familiar with the North Pacific, the FSM is one of the, well, 3 countries. There's Palau, there's FSM, and RMI in the North Pacific. These are ADB member countries. The FSM is, from east to west, it's about close to 3,000 kilometers. And there are 4 main states, Yap, Kosrae, Chuuk, and Ponape. We have ongoing projects in Yap and Kosrae, where we're helping them with their renewable energy plans in both states. So there is, these are on the main islands of Yap and Kosrae. We also are providing some support in Ponape, which is the administrative capital, where the Ponape Utility Corporation is looking at various reform actions on improving their efficiency. So that's an ongoing project. I will talk a little more about the smaller islands in the FSM. This is where the focus of the cruise project has been. The FSM has a national master plan where they've looked at what would be needed to electrify the country. They have a target of getting there by 2030, as well as how do you move towards more renewable energy based power supply. So there is that plan that was prepared, I believe, in 2017, 2018 with the support of the World Bank. And they are now in the process of trying to, get some of this implemented. Outside the main islands, energy access is a challenge. There are small community gensets which have been providing electricity to people who can afford the diesel power. The focus from the government is to try and involve the utilities, the 4 utilities in the 4 states on some of this electrification and water-related interventions. And so that's where the opportunities are that we've been looking at. And the intent is to see how this can be replicated just in the state of Chuuk, which is the largest state. Of the 42 inhabited islands, only 2 currently have access to electricity. The remaining 40 have to be electrified over the next few years. So that's where the focus of most of the donor partners has been over the last year or so in terms of putting together the financing that's needed to help support this, as well as the capacity building that's needed to ensure that these systems, once they are built, can be operated and support these communities. So just a little bit about the cruise project. This is coming, it's basically trying to meet the demand for clean energy and water, particularly drinking water on the smaller islands. We were, over 2024, the early part of 2024, we'd helped, with some technical assistance that supported, the whole kind of household surveys across these in 3 initial islands. All 3 are in Chuuk, Peace Paneo, Phefen, and Ethin. Phefen is an agricultural island. Peace Paneo and Ethin are smaller islands, more atoll-based kind of outlooks. And the intent is to work with the Chuuk Public Utility Corporation, which is the primary provider of electricity and water in the main island of Vino in the state of Chuuk. We call this a sector approach because this is a ADB delivery modality which allows us to engage in phases. So the first phase is what has been appraised and has been cleared for investments. And subsequently, we'll have 2 more phases that come up, covering the remaining states, including Chuuk, of course, will be the primary focus, but then there's also an interest in Ponape, Kosrae, and Yap to be able to take this forward. Just in terms of overall outputs, this is what the cruise project is supporting. We're looking at resilient renewable energy and water systems on these smaller islands. And more specifically, there's investments in solar PV and battery storage, electricity distribution, rainwater collection, as well as storage, as well as training of the staff who would be employed by CPUC on these islands for the delivery of services. The second output is around low carbon installations, which will support on adaptation and improving the resilience, the economic resilience on these islands. This is focused around support for desalination of water to get drinking water, and then ice machines and cold storage, which will be supporting the agriculture and fisheries activities in terms of, well, these are productive energy applications that would be useful for the islanders in these small islands to get their product to the main markets in Vino and elsewhere in the FSM. And then output 3 is overall program management, as well as support to the utilities and government on rolling the program out, as well as reaching out to the community in terms of ensuring that these assets that are being created and the systems being designed are relevant and useful in their context going forward. So that's where, that's the overall kind of program that's being developed in the FSM. This is, the overall cost is about 25 million for the cruise project, of which ADB is putting in about 15 million of grant funds. We also have partners, in this case, the SPC, which is the Pacific Secretariat. They have funding from the European Union and Australia, which they are using primarily to support on output 1, which is on renewable energy and battery systems. ADB funding is focused on the remaining elements around output 1, output 2, and then output 3. So we have a co-financing agreement with them where we are also helping manage the overall safeguards, processing, and implementation for the project. There's also support that's coming from the Irish government, and so they have a trust fund which is contributing to this project. Let me just quickly take you through a couple of examples of what is happening. So this is the island of Pfäffen, which is in the lagoon of Chuuk. This is currently an unelectrified island, and the intent, and you can see on the right how the population is spread across the island. G1, G2, and G3 are identified as the locations of the generator sets that will come up. And you can see the yellow distribution line that's going across the island to create a ring to provide electricity where it's needed. At the G1 site, we have pergolas, which will essentially be solar PV, receiving stations, which essentially, getting the input on solar and converting it to electricity. And that's where the CPUC utility would be involved with ensuring that these installations are operating the way they should. And on the productive energy applications, the focus is on looking at desalinated water supply, ice making, and cold storage, which will come up in Pfäffen and Peace and Ethen and all these islands to be able to provide those services to the local community. Now, just in terms of the overall climate rationale, the FSM is a place where there has been significant diversity in rainfall patterns. And so what has been observed over the last 5 to 10 years is drinking water tends to be a problem, and they need to have to ship this from the main islands to the smaller islands on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis to meet the drinking water needs. So the intent is the cruise project should help with some of that self-reliance on improving the reliance on these islands for their water and ice-related requirements. And again, just on Pfäffen, for those interested, the way these systems are designed is we're using HOMO-based models, which estimate the demand for electricity, and if you notice, the lines in green are the bars in green are essentially the household demand. There are some small businesses and institutions, schools, the local clinics, and the part right on top is the PUE, the productive energy usage, which is what we are trying to support under this project. As you can see, the demand for electricity increases by about 18%, largely in the daytime hours, to ensure that the PUEs are sized to a level that they can meet the island's requirements for drinking water and ice. However, the impact on the peak demand is fairly minimal, given the peak demand happens at night about 9 p.m., which is largely a lighting kind of load. So that's how these systems have been designed. And again, part of the due diligence also looked at the space requirements for storage of rainwater, the RO plant and storage, as well as the distribution for that, along with the ice making and cold storage facilities that would be set up under the project and then operated by CPUC with the support of the local island private sector entities. And again, I'll just close with, so this was a project that was conceived in 2023. We took this up last year. It's been approved in December, and we're just starting implementation over the next 4 years. And we're looking forward to seeing how this can support the FSM on adapting to some of the challenges they face in these smaller islands. Thank you. I'll also just quickly leave you with a couple of other examples. This one is something that we had worked on in the Maldives a few years ago, where we looked at an evolution of some of these diesel mini grids, moving them from pure diesel operation to including renewables without batteries, and then with batteries, and moving to 100% renewable energy kind of solution. The costs tend to go up as you try and move towards 100% RE. So the focus of project design is largely to focus around where's an optimum level where the energy and battery storage is optimally designed. This is another example where ADB partnered with the Global Sustainable Energy Partnership, GSEP. In this case, we were working with Kansai Electric, which is a member of GSEP in the Maldives, on supporting them with their, this was a pilot that was taken up on putting together an ice machine on the island of Defushi, which was very useful to create ice. The ice was sold, locally, as well as help the fisher community in terms of preserving their catch for selling in Malé. And this is something that the community has adopted. They're also putting together funds to ensure that these assets are maintained because they see huge value with something like this. So this was a project that was completed in 2016, but was kind of instrumental in some of the work that we picked up in the FSM subsequently. Thank you.
Thanks, Len, so much. I think, thanks. And I think from your examples from both FSM and Maldives, there is potentially a case that in very small island states, or specifically, outer islands, there could be a case that investments in energy and, of course, renewable energy, is absolute essential bedrock for creating a resilient system in that island, because everything you do is pretty much dependent on energy, whether it's livelihoods or service delivery, etc. So thanks for highlighting that. I'll move to Selena, to you from a World Bank's perspective. If you want to share some examples of what you guys are doing in adaptation energy space. Thank you.
Thank you. So for my presentation, I would like to give an overview of the new developments at the World Bank's energy team on enhancing resilience with a focus on scaling up its investments. So while at the corporate level, efforts to enhance resilience to growing climate and disaster risk have been expanding already, a big milestone for us energy team was setting up a new program called EEX Resilience Hub, which is dedicated to mainstreaming climate and disaster resilience into all of the World Bank's energy financing operations, analytics, and policy dialogues at the global, regional, and country levels. This new development in itself reflects a growing recognition that resilience is becoming essential to energy, and very rightly so, because increasing disaster risk, if left unmanaged, is bound to harm all the hard-won development gains in the past, and also harm the effectiveness and sustainability of the energy investment made today. So to dive into the topic of the session on scaling up investment and financing for resilience in energy, there are mainly three things that we do systematically. First is mainstreaming vulnerability assessment to inform all the project designs, which for us serves as an entry point to shape the financing operations. And once we have a good understanding of the risk and their impacts, we intervene directly to integrate concrete resilience factors into the project operations by articulating the costs and benefits of resilience and inserting tailored investment activities dedicated to enhancing resilience, such as climate proofing the transmission lines for regional interconnection projects or working with utilities and regulators to develop adaptable resilience standards. And lastly, we replicate successful models to achieve scale. And as they mature, we threaten ways for the private sector engagement, for which we are working very closely with our World Bank Group Private Sector and Guarantees Arm, IFC and MICA. To give some illustrative examples for each of these three pillars, here is an example of the vulnerability assessment that we did for Vietnam. This assessment, which was done at this level of comprehensiveness for the first time, can now serve as a reference point that serves all the World Bank Vietnam Energy Project designs, analysis, and policy dialogues that we have with the counterparts, helping us as well as the government make most informed investment decisions for the grid modernization and energy resilience building initiative. On the second pillar, integrating concrete resilience elements into World Bank financing operation, one thing that we're working very closely on is integrating resilience factors into the power system modeling. Now, I'm not a modeler myself, so I cannot detail on the mechanics, but what I do know is that capturing resilience in modeling, power system modeling in the case of energy, is critical, which without is very challenging to make a stand for investing in resilience. So we're trying to articulate the impacts of climate and disaster risk in more concrete terms, be it the magnitude of loss and damage or increased investment needs to achieve more resilient energy pathway. Of course, as with all modeling in the world, they are not perfect, and the data gap, as we have talked about in the morning, is a huge barrier, combined with very multiple uncertainties. But we find this effort and exercise really help increase the prominence of resilience in high-level messages that influence policymaking and investment decisions. Another effort that we do is, as part of the integrating resilience into World Bank energy financing, is to articulate the costs and benefits at the project level. As many of you would know, and we discussed it briefly in the morning as well, this elusive costs and benefits of climate resilience investment is a major barrier despite the growing needs. So we are trying to put more concrete numbers behind them to build more business cases. And it's interesting that the ADB also came up with the Micronesia project. But in this particular case of Micronesia Energy Access Project, we for the first time tried quantifying the costs and benefits of resilience measures as part of the project economic analysis, which, as you can see, yielded remarkable benefits centered around avoided damages and reduced outages. And this finding, backed by strong numbers, really opened doors for the project team to invest in concrete resilience enhancing measures as part of the project financing design. What we also do in parallel is trying to collect the cost ranges for the key adaptation and resilience measures employed, which in many cases is the first question that we get when we raise the need for more resilience. In fact, I was in Zambia last week discussing how we can help make the government their energy access and solar PV expansion plan more resilient. And one of the most frequent questions that we got was how much they would cost. So understanding the cost of what we are offering is indeed a very valid question, especially for a lot of the client countries that we work with where affordability is key. And very quickly, here is a snapshot of where we directly supported a country, in this case, Indonesia, with producing an investment strategy for making their power system assets more resilient with concrete measures and expected cost. Lastly, on the third pillar, investment at scale through private sector mobilization, our rule of thumb here is to focus on upstream policy and regulatory developments to foster an enabling environment that attracts private investment. One World Bank financing instrument that does exactly this is what we call DPF, Development Policy Financing, which is a dispersing financing tool to help the borrower address an actual or anticipated development financing requirements, which are primarily policy and regulatory reforms that serves as a key enabling blocks to foster competitive markets and investment. So in the case of resilience, we are witnessing a rapid growth of World Bank DPF, including key actions on resilience, such as mandating utilities to carry out risk screening and incorporating the findings into their system planning. And we anticipate that these policy and regulatory improvements over time can help boost confidence in investing in climate resilience space. In parallel, in more mature markets where the private sector already plays an active role, be it as a developer, financier, or insurer, we try to capture the growing business models to explore ways to adapt, replicate, and scale up. And for this, there's a currently ongoing work with IFC compiling those exemplary business cases and innovative financing modalities. And lastly, just like the ADB, we see a great value in convening people to share insights and discuss. And one key area that we're delving into is the regulatory and governance landscape that dictates who is responsible for what actions and who pays for the upfront cost. In fact, there is an ongoing BBL series that we're carrying out on this very particular topic on regulatory and landscape and governance. So I hope that many of you can join in the future to share your thoughts. Last but not least, we try to make the best strategic use of the limited concessional funds to leverage in more private capital. And one great example here is our partnership with PF, Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, whose core objective is to develop more effective PPP models in infrastructure to maximize development at scale. And although in early stages, we are working with them to explore what PPP frameworks for climate resilience investments for hydropower projects could look like and initiate some pilots, which would be fantastic given the massive scale of investment needed for hydropower and its particular vulnerability to growing climate and disaster risk. So with this, let me conclude my presentation and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Salona, so much. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation showing the wide breadth of work you guys are doing in World Bank. And I think it's very clear from your presentation that when you talk about solutions, it's not just the one particular solution, but you have to do a whole bunch of things, starting from investment strategy, assessments, making the economic case, to really go forward with the investments. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Maybe we'll move to the third speaker, Janchan from Arup, to show a little bit of private sector perspectives on how do you bring energy and adaptation together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here to share some of our experience in looking at the resilience of energy systems and interventions. So for those of you who haven't heard of Arup, we are an engineering company, engineering consultant company worldwide. We have about 18,000 people across the globe, and we operate in more than 40 countries. So I am personally based in Singapore, and I look after the energy and transmission and distribution teams across Southeast Asia. And we have been seeing from the private sector perspective, as well as governments and policymakers, quite a few interest in actually looking at resilience and resilience intervention as part of system planning for energy systems. So what I realized from the conversations is that there are quite a few drivers to that. One of it being that climate threats on grid infrastructure is becoming real, and people starting to see the outcome of climate change onto energy systems. Secondly is obviously the increasing reliance of their customers, mainly to do with the critical infrastructure, on reliable electricity supply. There is a change in the energy landscape from a generation perspective. So more and more inverter connected renewables being implemented and will become a predominant sort of source of energy in many of the countries. And inherently, these sources of energy are intermittent and would have a negative impact actually on system stability. Last but not the least, from a cross-border dependency perspective, electricity utilities are becoming more dependent on wider network problems, network stability issues happening in another country might impact on countries. For example, in the case of Singapore, where they're planning to import 6 gigawatts of energy from neighboring countries, issues in countries thousands of kilometers away might cause system energy issues in Singapore. So Arup's been involved in creating its own resilience assessment framework. About 10 years ago, we started to get involved in what we call the city resilience framework, where we come up with a framework to assess the resilience from a holistic perspective for cities in the form of security, in the form of energy supply, water supply, and we've implemented this proof of concept with the Rockefeller Foundation across all the continents in 5 different countries. And we have then adopted the same framework, and we tailorized it for the water industry, meaning looking at the resilience of water supply for cities across about 20 countries across the world. And that has been quite a success, as we are able to really advise utilities on how they need to intervene to make sure that the supply of water is not interrupted in the event of any disruption to the system. Lately, we have gotten involved in the rail industry, looking at resilience of rail systems across the world. And nevertheless, from an energy perspective, we have a bespoke framework where we've implemented in the UK for the utilities in the UK. So this framework that you're looking at is a tailor-right solution, looking at from the top-down approach, having to assess the actual resilience level of utilities. And what that does is giving us the ability to actually pinpoint on areas that you will need to look at from a quantitative perspective. So top-down, qualitative, normally is done through our experience, engagement with the utility itself and the different stakeholders. So for this particular case, we actually interviewed more than 30 people from different departments of the utility to try and understand the processes, the physical systems, and the people who will be making decisions when there's a resilient event. After that, the more important aspect from our work is really how do we actually quantify the disturbance of climate risk into network operation. So for this particular work, we've developed the network model together with the network operator. And then we've modeled the hazards. So we have our in-house scientists looking at the probability, the likelihood, and the frequency of different climate events. And we map that across into the actual asset model where interfaces between lines, between generation, between the distribution network is actually mapped out from a end user perspective. So looking at the matrix, risk and resilience matrix for the end user perspective. So in a sense, what is the amount of energy not supplied to customer? What is the value of that energy not supplied? So some of the critical infrastructure, we cannot actually utilize financial or economic outputs to look at it. For example, hospitals, government departments, they need to be resilient and continuously being supplied electricity. So looking at the different aspects, we concentrated on the advice on implementation of intervention measures, mainly on the network enhancement things that can be done. So the highlights of the quantitative tool basically allows us to sort of like model and show from a visualization perspective the spatial and temporal impact of climate events. So for example, if you have a windstorm coming at different times, what are the impacts on certain places around the coast, and how does that impact cascade and propagates throughout the network? So in essence, you might have some issues in the coastal area, but actually the impact is being felt really far away from customers that are much more inland in the load centers. So this tool and this network model allows us to stress test different scenarios, allows us to understand what are the intervention measures that will have the highest impact on mitigating such problems. So this is an example, and the figures that you are seeing are mostly superficial, but what has been done in this particular project that you can see is that we modeled the propagation of a storm, a windstorm, across the coast. And this windstorm would be overlaid with the infrastructure, the assets, in this particular instance, transmission assets. And you can see that through modeling of the fragility of transmission lines, of structure, there will be an outcome of the matrix of what's being lost or energy that cannot be supplied. On the right-hand side, you can see the intervention that's being done on improving the recovery time of transmission system. So this could be not physical, but it could be crews on standby, it could be better response time, people getting spares for their structures, their towers, their lines to go on site and get this problem fixed quicker. Or it could also be a reinforcement or enhancement of the design of the towers itself. So conscious about time. So out of this whole quantitative assessment, we are able to come up with the maturity level of a organization, namely the utility, on the different aspects, process, infrastructure, and in this case, their supply chain integration. We look at how do we measure them in terms of how good they are from a resilience perspective in anticipating events, in resisting events, as well as in adapting to really mitigate the event. So in this slide, you can see that what we found as a key takeaway is that resilience is not built in the short term. You need to have a long term, so you need to have a short, medium, and long term implementation plan to ensure that going forward, all the future energy scenarios, the system needs to be up to date, will be aligned with your resilience approach and goals that you want to achieve. So I think that ends my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And it's great to see that the tool that was developed, and I'm very familiar with the Rockefeller's tool, being used in the context of energy sector. For highlighting the importance of this, of course, long-term planning, but also you talked about a very important aspect of looking at metrics and how do you then tally those metrics against your investments. So thanks for sharing that. We'll open up for discussions for 5 minutes. If you have any specific question to any of the panelists, or if you would like to share any specific solutions that you may have implemented in your country or projects, please do come forward. Thanks. Yes, please. A colleague at the back over there.
Hi, I'm Harsh from Lockton. Thank you so much for such a great presentation to all the speakers. My question is more towards, I've been hearing in all your presentations about, resilience, vulnerabilities, and how it's not just about ensuring that there's financial inclusion and more investment, but also how can we safeguard those investments. And, the World Bank officials spoke about how they're using their own insurance agencies to do that. What we're seeing is that there's still a big gap in terms of the insurance capacity available, and especially in not so developed economies, which results into a lot of reinsurance-driven approaches which have been taken. But overall, the solutioning, because there are multiple layers that get involved, lead to some ways just increasing the cost of risk management and insurance solutions to a very exorbitant level. So how are we looking at tackling that issue while financing cost is also increasing, but the protection cost is also increasing?
Thank you. We will take a couple of more questions and we'll come. Yes, please, over here.
Kyle Dada, Tenio from the United States. So our country is very good at learning the hard way on things, and so we have the regulatory commissions responding with utilities to approve investments in hardening the system after the fact. So Con Ed is approved to harden after Superstorm Sandy, California utilities on wildfire after the wildfire disasters. But it's been harder to get the regulatory commissions to approve the proactive changes around grid architecture, for example. We're just going to have our first major case in this in California this year with Southern Cal Edison. So I'd like the speakers, especially from the World Bank or others, to speak about how you're working it at the project level or other levels where you're looking at the proactive impact either in system losses or value of lost load to customers on your own approvals, and whether you're getting any traction in Asia or elsewhere in terms of getting the regulators to adopt those algorithms so we can see the holistic picture of the benefits and costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody commented earlier, this session is very good gender balance. It'd be great to hear some questions, suggestions from women participants also. No? All right, let's start with this 2 rounds of questions first. So I think maybe Tuval Saldana, if you want to answer a little bit about the second question around this proactiveness and how do you go about mindset shift within the World Bank also of energy colleagues who are working on these projects and looking at adaptation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think the financing tool that I brought up, DPF, exactly does that. It's not about just putting our monies to make sure that this one particular project that we're working on becomes more climate proofing, but we really need to change the enabling blocks, which really speaks to the regulation and governance space, which needs to be changed in order to bring in all these triggers that will allow more changes at the project level. So as mentioned, what we are focusing on there is whether we can work with the regulator and give them very specific mandates for all these utilities to have risk screenings periodically and incorporate these findings into their power system modeling and investment decisions. And what is also important is that because energy system, it doesn't work in a vacuum, what we also find very interesting is what is critical for countries to be able to have more resilient economy on overall, where energy plays a big role, is it needs to have a really good disaster risk management system at the macro level. So all these regulations that we're trying to apply at the energy sector, it needs to have a foundation at the national level, not at the sectoral level first, in order to start applying very specific regulations that are applicable for different sectors. And of course, energy, water, transport, they are all they're cross-sectoral activities that we also need to be mindful of. So it is indeed one space that we're looking very closely at. It is still in an infant stage. I have to admit that we only see a couple of 20 actions that have been implemented at the World Bank level so far, but we are witnessing a rapid growth. In about just last year, we approved 5 more out of the 20 that we had in the last decades. So we are seeing that growth happening, and we are also working very closely with the IMF. They also have a tool called RSF, which is, I cannot, yes, that one, which also looks at the exactly same space of trying to help the client countries improving the enabling space, not just one specific at the project level, but changing the rules of the game to make sure that it triggers more actions.
Thanks. Do you want to? Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to comment on the second question by Carl. So from our experience, I think on this particular project, what we've seen is that there is a consensus regulator and the utilities at the start of the sort of journey that resilience is going to be very important. And what the utility did was actually preempting the regulatory framework by providing the information before the regulation comes in. So in a sense, to influence and to provide justification for investment before regulation comes in. So from the European perspective, I think this is quite common, as in you can see that issues are starting to arise and regulators will need to come in. Before that, provide us with the data.
For highlighting the importance of the right regulatory framework, but also having a national level disaster risk management system. We can hear more from the next panel, which will talk about policies and regulations. Anyone take the question of insurance, disaster risk insurance in the energy sector, and how can you make it more effective, more efficient, more affordable? Yes, please.
I think it is a very important question. I don't have a very clear answer to that, but what I do know is that in some regions like Latin America, where the private sector plays a very active role in the energy sector, we've seen a lot of insurance schemes where the private sector comes in to cover for the utilities. But in many of the client countries that we work with, where the utilities are state-owned, the costs are eventually passed on to the customers. So yes, there's insurance scheme that you can try to come up with, but at the end of the day, we have to think about who eventually pays for the cost. And of course, in California, there are some innovative ways to go on about to cover for the big scale of investment needs. The Wildfire Fund is one where the utilities, they pull in their fundings together to be able to help each other in case of emergency. So we are looking at these different insurance schemes or financing modalities that can be adapted to the different regions, but it eventually will really boil down to the regulatory space, how the market is structured, how the power market system functions, to really come down to say what insurance scheme works best.
Agree, totally. And I think also the point that in the insurance conditions, it has to be seen as one solution in the larger basket of solutions for building resilience. So I think the most important, as the panelists talked about, investing in risk reduction or adaptation, that's where the money should be going. Of course, there will be some tail end events which you have to manage risks. And for those events, insurance might come in some cases. So with that, thank you to our panelists for joining this session. Really appreciate your insights. And we'll move on to the next, the final panel, focusing on policy and regulations. So big round of applause. Thank you. All right, so we move to the last final section, which is going to focus more on the enabling environment. We started discussion a little bit about already in the previous panel, looking at policies, regulatory systems, incentive mechanisms, institutional strengthening, capacity building, etc. So very happy to have with us three speakers with us. So we have got Commissioner Rachel Herrera from the Climate Change Commission of Philippines. Rachel, thanks for joining us. Thank you. We have His Excellency Chelidin, who is the Undersecretary of State of Ministry of Mines and Energy from Cambodia. Thank you, Excellency, for joining us. And we have Anna Diaz, who's a Program Manager from ISO. So great panelists. Maybe we'll hear from you, Rachel, first, if that's okay with you. From Philippines perspective, you have a very strong policy environment for climate change and adaptation too, with the very recent National Adaptation Plan. So how does energy sector features in that, and what kind of policy strengthening is required in the country to make the sector more resilient? You can speak from here or from there, whichever you prefer. Sure, of course, it's up to you. Yes, sure, definitely. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Argo, and good morning to all fellow speakers, excellencies, the distinguished guests. I'm honored to be here, and as to your question, Argo, I think I might already go straight and zoom in into our National Adaptation Plan, which is the country's first. And of course, there are specific recommendations when it comes to increasing resilience of the energy sector there. We know that global temperatures will continue to rise, and the sobering projection is now that we are on our way to a 3-degree Celsius temperature rise by end of the century. And this brings the energy sector resilience, which is considered part of critical infrastructure, really at the forefront. And I would like to cite a recent OECD study assessing that our energy infrastructure in the Philippines already faces numerous challenges. We have one of the highest priced electricity in Asia. And of course, the condition in terms of our vulnerability is that we are experiencing more frequent and more intense extreme weather events, whether it's flooding or severe heat waves, severe wind, and drought, and El Nino in recent years. And this has led to unplanned power outages and blackouts. On screen, these are the 4 climatic impact drivers that we have chosen to focus on in our National Adaptation Plan, or NAP. Our NAP from 2023 to 2028 outlines our key adaptation strategies, and among the many hazards and climate risks that have been identified present in the country, we have chosen to focus on data on these four. And just to for a better appreciation of the process is that we have used data from our Met agency and brought together national climate scientists to form part of a consultative group of experts, just to emphasize that the NAP is data-driven and has benefited from climate analytics. And maybe good also to mention that we received support through the UK Global Gateway Program and with technical expertise from the Boston Consulting Group. The NAP, again, is a country-driven collaborative effort driven through or steered by the Climate Change Commission and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And it's a cornerstone, really, our very first national strategy for adaptation. And the bold vision is to steadily reduce climate-related loss and damage and build adaptive capacity towards transformative resilience and sustainable development. So the NAP provides a roadmap identifying 8 priority adaptation sectors. The energy sector on this slide, alongside transport and communications, is considered a pillar underpinning economic resilience in the way that it ensures economic well-being and the provision of services of goods for the Filipino people. And we have also estimated in our NAP that 8% of our current infrastructure, including transmission lines, substations, poles, and generators, will be exposed to extreme climate events. The estimation is just 3 billion, but this is direct damage. So there's, of course, a lot more to say about the indirect damage and all the non-economic disadvantages that this brings about. The US dollar equivalent is probably in the $50 million or so annually throughout the 2030s. In response to these findings, our NAP outlines 2 key outcomes. It's to ensure comprehensive planning and response mechanisms across our energy infrastructure systems. And second is that we must have sufficient capacity of energy infrastructure systems to meet the evolved demand induced by climate change. So this is increased demand influenced by hotter temperatures, the extreme heat that we've been experiencing. It's really worsening the last 2 or 3 years or so, canceling classes, and forcing really our agricultural workers to change the systems or the schedule of planting, and therefore reducing productivity. So in terms of the indicative or the adaptation strategies that we are already implementing for the energy sector, I would allow me to enumerate. We first underscore the need really to be intentional in terms of the design of energy infrastructure, that we must have upgraded design codes, considering that this is a critical infrastructure and therefore we must account for better materials, more resilient materials to be used. And second is that we regulate and enforce critical infrastructure hazards based on land zoning and risk assessment. This means implementing comprehensive vulnerability and disaster risk assessment, not just at the national level, but also local, as our local government units issue permits for all energy infrastructure construction and deployment. Incorporation as well of climate risk into planning of roadways and transportation hubs as they relate to where the posts, the grids are located, and integration of energy infrastructure planning and site selection. This must be in the best suited areas. You don't want to put your infrastructure in low-lying areas where they are going to be exposed to flooding, to sea level rise, and you must account for the shifting in climate patterns as well. Also, integration of energy infrastructure, I've mentioned that. So climate proofing in general of critical infrastructure. So this means considering green, green or nature-based solutions in the design of infrastructure to possibly windproof or elevate. These are already initiatives that are part of the energy resiliency policy of our Department of Energy and the asset preservation program of our Department of Public Works. So there's also the mention of R&D. We must perform research to understand energy flow accounts in relation to natural capital accounts so that we know the flow of energy inputs to the economy and as they flow to the environment for the well-being of communities. So we're not only thinking of industries, but really community-based policies that promote well-being, safety, and this must also include policies that encourage alternative energy sources. So I would like to cite cases of Typhoon Odette, where the entire island of Cebu really lost its energy sources. This is one of the most populous islands, major transport, a commercial hub in the country. And so we must have diversified sources of energy and of course for the benefit of the people and the consumers, and which means we must incentivize investors and developers to consider this in terms of their investment planning. Investment in smart grids to allow efficient distribution, real-time monitoring, and response to climate-related disruptions. So those are very specific strategies, more than what's contained in the slide. And I would like to also emphasize that the issue to deliver the ambition of the NAP is not just simply financing. Of course, that is a very big challenge that we face, but really key enablers to be mentioned is governance. So we developed the NAP precisely needing to put together all the best minds, the planners, the economic department, the infrastructure, public works, the scientists who have the climate data, and ensure that there is robust consultation to put together a good text and a very practical set of strategies. So not just for the energy sector actually, but all those 8 with impact to agri, water, and health, and so on. And then stakeholder engagement, ensuring also gender responsive approaches. And as we move towards implementation, really the management of sex disaggregated data so that more women are trained in the hard aspects of building the infrastructure, in capacitating them, and ensuring that also that the policies and in the design, these are inclusive to address the needs of women and other sectors that are still considered marginalized. We must have the skills and capacity building aspects ingrained and the data and knowledge infrastructure to also have the technology and innovation present. And last but not least is really the financing. So we have domestic public funds, that are already tagging through our climate change expenditure tagging process. We've identified what in the energy sector are going to adaptation and mitigation, and we must use this to leverage really international development assistance in terms of blended finance. We're accessing, of course, the Green Climate Fund. We have support from the ADB under the Climate Change Action Program. We also have a very small adaptation grant mechanism called the People Survival Fund, which has notably funded solar power irrigation projects in small municipalities here. So these are a myriad of financing sources that we really would want to put together to address issues and challenges in the energy sector. Okay, I think this is the last slide in terms of the roadmap, which we have divided into national and including local, because really there's a lot of power decentralized into our local government units, and they do know the local context, very tailored strategies that they can apply in their own areas. So really the approach must be inclusive. This is a major lesson that we've learned in developing the NAP, and the success really is to depends on ensuring that no one is left behind. We have a very varied geographical, we have an archipelago, so we have coastal communities, we have the uplands as well, and adaptation for us must mean that the efforts are felt at the last mile. So thank you very much. I think I will stop here.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting the intentional strategies that you guys have adapted to the NAP energy sector. It's important to also realize that many of the strategies, though you're focusing on energy sector, is actually dependent on actions in other sector. You talked about land use planning, zoning, and sector, which is a part of another sector itself, and not necessarily the ministry that looks at energy itself, right? So that's where the importance of governance comes in. Interest of time, I'll move to the next speaker, His Excellency from Cambodia, to share experiences from Cambodia. Thank you. 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope, because I'm among the last speaker, and I hope I don't run over time, because essentially speaking, I'm standing between the session and your lunch. So I tried to be on time. My name is Lin Che. I'm the Undersecretary of State for the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Cambodia. We are essentially a ministry that is responsible for three main sectors. One is energy, obviously. Second is mining and minerals. And last but not least is oil and gas, both upstream and downstream. I think to set the stage, I think from morning until up to now, at least, we have heard, actually, before coming here, I thought, I'm gonna be an expert on this subject. But essentially, I feel that after today's session, Cambodia actually have a lot to learn from a global perspective, regional perspective, and then also, from our ASEAN counterpart, the Philippines, as a member state. I mean, that's going from the critical, the essential of data, the collaboration, and then also the financing aspect. So without further ado, I think my presentation is somewhat very similar to my colleagues from the Philippines, kind of, take a very narrow scope on Cambodia perspective. So basically what I'm be giving is about Cambodia energy sector. Second is on the policy we have in place in terms of energy and resilience. And maybe last but not least, the policy and the capacity building that we have very fortunate to receive from the development partners. Maybe with closing with the, what are the key message here from energy sector to the people. Okay, so to set the stage, again, what's Cambodia energy mix is nothing unique about it. Essentially, we are very similar to our ASEAN, neighbors, and due to our geographic location, our energy mix is again make up majority with renewable energy already. I think as we speak, it's about 20. In 2022, renewable energy consists of about 60%, and that number is going to be increased because we are more ambitious. And as of the end of last year, we actually approved another 23 project, which consists mainly in the renewable space as well, in solar, wind, and biomass. And with that, again, why do we want to set the stage about the energy mix? It's because the nature of our energy generation is very dependent on the weather. And whenever there's a climate change, there's an extreme weather, of course it will impact us very tremendous in one way or another. Again, as I said, we are, in our energy mix, it's already majority renewable. By 2030, we're gonna set at least 70% of our energy mix are all renewable, coming from sources such as hydro, solar, wind, and biomass. And hydro include pump storage hydro also. And of course, just like any country, as we heard in the last 2 days, is that more VRE into the system, there's always challenges as well. And that's why we also incorporate the solutions such as battery energy storage, pump storage hydro to address that challenge. So this is the overall map of Cambodia. If some of the participants do not already know, we are mainly, we have 2 river systems running to the country. We are part of the Mekong region. That's why we are a member of the Great Mekong Subregion, GMS. So we have the Mekong going from north to south, coming from Laos all the way to Vietnam in the downstream. So talking about the weather, again, nothing new. Just now the speaker from UNESCAP already mentioned, we do experience flooding due to the proximity to the river and the effect of monsoon. We also experience drought and rising temperature, of course. And in each of these events, we do get a very severe consequences. Obviously, for example, flooding, it impact our hydro generation. The drought, obviously, it impact more on the agriculture. Due to our economic structure, we are heavily, still a rice exporting, very dependent on agriculture. So any of these events not only impact energy sector, but then also the agriculture. And the last on the rising temperature, obviously, again, it's nothing unique about that. I think all countries in this region, due to our tropical nature, we're very close to equator, rising temperature meaning more cooling will be needed, and therefore the peak demand of the electricity will be required. So let me switch gear a little bit about, from a government perspective, because obviously I come from the ministry, and what we do is, a very heavy focus on policy as well as regulation. So we do have put in place various strategy, and among those I'd like to highlight, a couple of them. One is on the Cambodian climate change strategic plan that has been updated in 2024. That will take us, over the next 10 years to 2033. At my ministry, we do have 2 key documents. One is called the PDP, the Power Development Plan, or what we call a master plan, that will take us until 2040. And of course, we are doing this based on the demand forecast, based on maximizing the resource that we have domestically. By the way, we produce our electricity based on 86% domestic and another 13 or 14%, roughly speaking, import from our neighbors, and that include Laos PDR, Thailand, and Vietnam. Recent year, we also adopt the National Energy Efficiency Policy up to 2030. And the key sector, again, is nothing new, similar to the IEA standard, and that include efficiency in industry, transport, building, residential, appliance, and things like that. Again, a whole set of policy. I'm not going to go to all, but one of the key highlight there is NDC 2.0. We are trying to finish up the NDC 3.0 updated, which is due this July. And why I want to raise up NDC? Because again, it go back to 2 main factors. One is mitigation factors, mitigation measures, and adaptation measure. Just now, the speaker from the Philippines already mentioned about adaptation. And in energy sector, we do adopt a number of mitigation measure, but adaptation measure, we kind of classify into three, and I should have included in the slide, but let me kind of briefly talk about it. One is enhanced climate-proof energy infrastructure. When I say energy infrastructure, it's really, you know, like the previous speaker was saying about generation, transmission, distribution, you know, the whole energy system. Second is on strengthened grid resilience and monitoring in real time. This is also another essential tool that we need to adopt. And last but not least, on enhanced preparedness and capacity building. Of course, when we look at resilience, it cut across, you know, both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. While I stand here to speak to you, we already have some capacity. Do we need more? Of course. And that's why it's kind of lead me to my last slide about our cooperation with all these different partners. And obviously, we've been working with the ADB, with the World Bank, to trying to, you know, strengthen our capacity in terms of not only policy, but then also on the operational level, plan level, meaning, you know, our utility company, they need to be good at weather forecast, incorporating all the data. And it's kind of very excited to me, the fact that earlier I have speaker from UNESCAP, and then also, you know, other speaker mentioned about data, machine learning, all of that. Before, maybe this is kind of a stretch, but now with these capabilities, we can do a lot more. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, and thanks for highlighting the fact that in the NDC 3.0 for Cambodia, we can expect to see more of adaptation in the energy sector, which was Jinsun's earlier presentation talked about how NDCs don't talk about adaptation so much. Last but not the least, Speaker Lisa from ISO. If you can share a little bit about what ISO is doing on resilience, but more importantly, from the point of standards, because I think that's the important point. Everybody's talking about climate proofing of infrastructure. If you don't have the right standards in place, then it's always difficult to implement it. So please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to keep my 8 minutes. It's a pleasure to join you today. I'm Ana Diaz from the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, as you may know us. We're here to talk about resilience in energy systems, and I want to begin with a simple statement that sometimes goes overlooked. Resilience energy systems are not built by infrastructure alone. They are enabled by standards and sustained through local capacity. Infrastructure matters, of course, but without the right rules, the tools, and skills in place, even the best built systems can falter in the face of climate shocks. So today I want to briefly share with you how international standards and capacity building can help turn resilience from aspiration into action, and how this combination is already working on the ground. But first, a quick word on ISO. We're a global, independent, non-governmental organization that develops voluntary, consensus-based international standards through 170 national standards bodies, our members in the countries, and over 800 international technical committees. These standards are developed by experts from government, industry, academia, civil society, ensuring that they are not only technically sound, but also broadly applicable. In the climate and energy space, ISO is taking a proactive stance. We've committed to helping countries and organizations achieve or reach net zero, enhancing climate resilience and adaptation, and embedding climate actions in governance and management systems. To date, ISO has developed over 500 standards relevant to climate action, ranging from carbon accounting and life cycle assessments to climate risk management and energy efficiency. So how do these standards support resilient energy systems? I'm going to highlight 6 ways. I'm not an expert on the standards, full disclosure, but, and I'm sure there are many, many other ways, but I'll highlight only 6 in the interest of time. Standards like ISO 14091 help organizations assess climate risks. By guiding the determination of scope and methodology, this standard helps ensure that risk assessments are both rigorous and tailored to real-world conditions. This includes identifying the specific systems at risk, the population groups affected, and the range of hazards to be considered, such as extreme weather events or gradual shifts in climate patterns. It also prompts careful reflection on spatial and temporal resolution, available resources, and the level of detail needed for the assessment to be actionable. This structured approach is essentially critical in the context of clean energy planning and climate resilience, where decisions must be evidence-based, inclusive, and fit for purpose. Also, technical standards guide the design of infrastructure to withstand specific climate conditions like extreme heat, wind, or corrosion. Standards also help ensure that energy systems are rebuilt after disruptions in ways that can make them stronger, smarter, and more resilient to future shocks, talking about building back better. Standards such as ISO 50001 on energy management systems help utilities and industries improve efficiency and resilience while transitioning to low carbon systems, especially when paired with renewable integration and smart grid standards. With energy systems becoming more decentralized and digital, standards also help ensure that solar panels, batteries, EV chargers, and control systems work together safely and reliably. And finally, standards help governments craft effective regulations and de-risk investments, which, as we know, is a key concern in developing nations. Now, these standards are not theoretical. They're used every day by engineers, regulators, and utilities to define what good looks like, ensure consistency in quality, safety, and performance. But as we know, even the best standards won't matter if people and institutions cannot apply them. And that's where capacity building comes in. And why at ISO, through the Action Plan for Developing Countries, we work closely with national standards bodies, policymakers, regulators, the private sector, and other stakeholders to support the participation of developing countries in international standardization so that the outputs of these processes reflect their needs and priorities, thus enabling their application. Linked to this, we also promote and support the uptake or implementation of these standards in the public and private sectors. We're seeing this come to life through initiatives such as the ISO Standards for Sustainability program, or more recent projects such as Standards for Climate Action, Advancing Adaptation in Latin America and the Caribbean, funded by the Global Environmental Facility, or GEF. Through these initiatives, we are equipping public institutions and businesses, especially SMEs in developing countries, with the tools, the training, and standards-based approaches needed to assess climate risks and develop actionable and fundable adaptation plans, thus helping them access much-needed climate finance. These types of efforts are bridging the gap between global standards and local implementation, proving that standards, when combined with capacity building, can catalyze real resilience and public-private collaboration. This is how we turn standards from paper into practice, and why capacity building for ISO is not an add-on, but a core pillar of resilience. And so if standards define what needs to be done, then capacity building and policy determine who can do it and how fast they can move. These three elements don't operate in isolation. In fact, when they reinforce each other, we see real systems change. Standards provide a common language and benchmarks for quality, safety, sustainability, and innovation. They translate high-level policy goals into practical tools and measurable outcomes. Capacity building ensures that institutions, professionals, and communities have the knowledge, skills, and the infrastructure to implement and benefit from standards. Without this, standards risk remaining paper-based ideals. Now, policy sets a direction and creates the incentives or the mandates for the use of standards and investing in capacity building. When policy integrates standards and supports capacity development, the entire system becomes more effective and more resilient. Together, they form a reinforcing system. Policies reference and adopt standards. Standards become more actionable through capacity building, and capacity building aligns with policy priorities and helps scale implementation. And so, let me end where I began. Resilient energy systems are not built by infrastructure alone. They are enabled by standards and sustained through local capacity. If we want energy systems that can withstand the shocks of tomorrow, like floods, heat waves, hurricanes, we need both the tools and the know-how. And at ISO, we are proud to contribute to both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Great presentation for highlighting the importance of standard, the work ISO is doing, but also reminding us that standards actually provides a common language in the countries, and connecting to what Rachel, you were talking about. If you have a good standard, have the right policies, can help you implement with the right incentive mechanisms, and the importance of capacity building. I will open up now for the next 5 minutes of questions. If anybody want to have specific questions to the panelists, or if you want to share any of your work also, please go ahead.
Okay, you want more women participation?
Yes,
Here I am.
Please. Great.
Hello again, I'm Rocio from Brina Consulting in Italy. In the past, I worked also with local governments, so I really appreciate how the diverse sessions of today of this workshop were, let's say, interconnected between them, and it was really interesting. Talking in particular and working in Latin America with, talking about the Global South, right? On resilience strategies for urban and local implementation. I want to just come back to something that is this, we need a framework at the national level where the governments have the capacity of think also in the prioritization in the short, medium, and long terms of this planning. But it's also important to know that this data we need for the diagnosis and to also see the future and calculate, okay, what could be the impact of the climate change. There is also something in the local aspects inside this region in particular that has a lot of asymmetries inside the same country. There is also the informality of data. And I think that this is also a problem because we can get financing for the implementation, but it's a little gap in the diagnosis and in the real, let's say, implementation path when we are talking about this kind of data from going to the local. And in this, this is a comment more open to the different view of the speakers, but also I think that in this case, it's something important to address also the need of smart financing regarding also this gap. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I'll take a couple of more questions and then hand over to the panelists. Anybody else? We're almost there for lunchtime. Swati, please.
So my question is a little technical. Given that the scale and the intensity of physical events is drastically changing, how do we keep updating the baseline and therefore the standards to meet, to ensure that the assets and the infrastructure is able to withstand newer and higher intensities? And this also links to not just Anna from ISO, but also to the representatives from the countries, because this also involves capacity building, data monitoring, that entire system. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. If there are no other hands, we'll hand over to panelists. First round, of course, we know we need money for actual investments, but I think all of you talked about, even the previous panelists, the importance of vulnerability assessment, better assessments, better data, but that also requires financing. You need to finance that, specifically if you want to capture local level data, which is very important. So how do you go towards this smart financing option? And the second is, of course, the risk is continuously changing. It's never static. So how do you, I think, build some sort of adaptive management principles in your planning process so that you continuously learn and build on that? Any guidance? Do you want to start out from your side? Okay. Anybody wants the first question on financing?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for those very important questions. Whenever we discuss climate resilience, so often the underpinning or where we end up really is the issue of financing. And in terms of the adaptation cost for the Philippines, we've estimated it to be $11.5 billion annually. So if we could get everything on that wish list, this is the amount of money that we need to implement all those strategies, of course, including the 7 other sectors. In terms of the energy sector, really the role of the private sector in investments is critical, and our government acknowledges that. And the Philippine Energy Plan, in terms of its targets to, aside from mitigation, having RE 40% by mid-century, is in terms of adaptation. They've really put the policies to enable investments, the green lanes that have been given a signal by the president to expedite permitting. So these are policies that are really intended to mobilize, to bring the financing that is not just with the end in mind to bring this sector to be more and more profitable, but also to play its role in bringing us to net zero as we need to by end of the century. So the NAP financing is really considerable, and we cannot support that fully from the national budget. Data management must be robust. So, and it cannot also be realistically, you know, uh, updated every year. And even our NAP only has provincial level data. We could not even have yet city or municipal level data. So again, this needs institutional support, this needs financing support. So all these elements must come together. I don't think I answered the question
that's it,
directly,
thank you.
but just to give us
Thanks.
really the realistic.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks a lot. Do you want to answer anything from a Cambodia perspective? Any suggestions on financing and on data?
Yes.
And keep on updating.
So thank you for the two questions. I think it's very true and relevant. However, in the context of Cambodia, because we are a small country, I think even at the subnational level, we don't have any issue with the data with the national at the national level. So obviously, I think you highlight a very key important thing: data financing. Very fortunately, also we also I think Selena just now from the World Bank presented what the World Bank have done with Vietnam in regarding to the country climate and development. Cambodia also have the same back in 2023. So that should be like, for us, it's a benchmark of something that is applicable to Cambodia. So on the data side, we rely heavily on, all the different stakeholders within the national government on that. So that's kind of address the first question. Second question, I think it's a very fair, valid one. How do we address resilience when the baseline keep changing in the event of extreme weather? I mean, I'm not saying every year, but every now and then you get the record heat, record rainfall, and you start to see the pattern. Obviously, earlier, I talked to the speaker from UNESCOP. Even the recent event as early as in April this year, when the event of earthquake in Myanmar, because we are not landlocked, but we are interconnected somewhat. Bangkok feel the earthquake for the first time, I don't know, in history, and we could feel too, but at a rather manageable, shock. A major infrastructure such as hydro dam, how do we account for that? I mean, to be quite frankly with you, during the construction 10, 20 years ago, have those not only building, but all these mega infrastructures such as bridge, highway, wasn't even part of the consideration. So that's just the nature of things that, outlier or become the new norm of the, event in the coming years. It is a challenge. However, we are leveraging, for example, on the weather forecast, understanding the pattern, planning our energy generation accordingly based on two sources, hydro, wind, and solar, three actually. Machine learning, more data, the better we can predict. But I think for now, that's the best we could do. But, we always plan for the unplanned event to happen. Sorry.
Thank you. Anna, any last word from your side?
Yes, well, maybe with 2 points. I think, well, first in terms of climate finance, it's important from the standards perspective to mention that, of course, standards help reduce technical and operational uncertainties. It really does, like you were saying before, it does even the playing field as well, so that all different countries, different organizations, whether public or private, can actually use these standards and actually signal to financiers that they are accountable, that they are transparent, and that they will have more confidence, or they could have more confidence in these investments. So that's the first point. In terms of the second point, the second question regarding how do we keep up with science, that's exactly what the ISO system is geared to do. The ISO system ensures that standards are continuously revised. As I was saying before, we have in our technical committees members from academia, think tanks, research organizations. They contribute systematically to the system. Our experts coming from all corners of the globe really contribute to that system being continuously keeping up with the latest science. So that's something that our system is really prepared for. And actually, now that I'm here, it's a very good moment to invite you all to join our technical committees. We have the technical committees 207, on environmental management. And it's really an invitation for all the different experts to join the fold of ISO and contribute to making sure that our science-based standards continue to be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are coming to an end of the session. I just want to highlight a few points before I hand over to Noel for delivering the closing remarks. I think it was interesting, and thanks, Jinsun, for organizing a session which covered a range of topics, starting from assessment tools to impacts to solutions and then to policy. And I think there are a few things that came out very strongly. One is the importance of information, data, data management systems, vulnerability assessment procedures. That's very important, because unless we understand the risk and we invest in measures to understand the risk, we can't come up with the right solution. So I think everybody talked about the importance of that. And then how you use the risk assessments as a part of project or CCDRs in your World Bank's case or in Cambodia's policy information. I think that's important. The second, I think everybody talked a lot about the enabling environment, specifically policies, whether it's through standards, whether it's the right kind of institutions, right kind of incentive mechanisms, how policies can really provide the enabling environment for the energy sector to adapt, not just for itself, but help adapt the wider system to which the energy sector provides service, like education, like health, like livelihoods, etc. The third point I think we heard a lot about is the approach towards the solution. Solutions are not only technical or technological solutions. Solutions are also about approaches, change in behavior, change in demand, change in the way we think, include adaptive management principles in energy sector policies and planning, long-term planning. We all heard a lot about this. How do you bring the private sector in, not just for de-risking purposes, also for looking at other products like insurance. So I think there was a lot of rich discussions around there. And I hope this is only a beginning of a conversation to take the work forward. With that, I'll hand a big round of applause for panelists, first of all. Thank you. And I will hand over the mic to my colleague, Noel O'Brien, who's the Director for Climate Change at ADB, for delivering some concluding thoughts and remarks. Thank you.
I think you can stay there, because I really feel like I'm now between you and lunch. It's already 12:30 and two people before me have already made this. Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. I'm really pleased to be here for this conversation. Thank you for the active participation in today's deep dive workshop on resilient energy systems against extreme weather events. We've had a rich and an insightful exchange of ideas over the past 3.5 hours. We started from examining the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events to exploring their direct and compounding impacts on energy systems and identifying practical and systemic solutions to strengthen resilience. Over the past 3.5 hours, we've had a rich and engaging exchange of ideas, insights, and experience. We heard how floods, storms, heat waves, and droughts are affecting every part of the energy value chain, from fuel supply and generation to transmission and distribution, and even demand patterns. We also heard how they pose an especially urgent threat to developing countries across Asia and the Pacific, where energy systems are already strained by growing demand, aging infrastructure, and limited financing. And I think every one of us has some experience in the very recent past of how this is affecting us. We saw last week's events in India's northeast with massive power outages due to floods. In my own personal 12 months, I got stuck between the border and between Croatia and Bosnia last year because the entire power system went down in 4 countries and the immigration system went out for 3 hours. And just in the question that's what he's just asked, how do we continuously adapt? In Ireland, which is my home country, we had the strongest storm we ever had earlier this year. We lost 25% of the grid connectivity to 5 million people over a 4-hour period. We had the equipment, but we just didn't have the people to connect that fast enough. And that starts to get people thinking about where they live, where they bought their house, if they have certain health issues. And so it just really does bring such a whole set of compounding factors to mind. Today, we've also discussed solutions. From the first two sessions, we were reminded of the power of science and data, presentations from the National Institute of Environmental Studies of Japan, UNESCAP, IAEA, EPRI. These all highlighted the advances in climate risk analytics and modeling that are helping us better anticipate, understand, and prepare for climate hazards in the energy sector. So through the experience of ADB, the World Bank, and ARUP, we saw how investments and systemic changes are being used to build climate resilient energy systems. And a key message from this was that resilience is no longer a niche consideration, but it is a core investment strategy. Our final session reminded us of the foundational importance of enabling policies and capacity building. These national experience from Philippines and Cambodia underscored how sound policies and long-term planning can create the environment for resilient infrastructure to take root. And the contributions from ISO reminded us that standards and knowledge sharing can be powerful levers for mainstreaming climate resilience across projects, regions, and stakeholders. So I think the question now is, where do we go from here? I think there are three key reflections from the events. First, we need to bridge the knowledge to action gap. The tools and the models that we discussed today, they are available, but they must be made accessible, localized, and integrated into decision-making processes across all of the energy sectors. And I think so important that we continue to have these kind of conversations, to continuously share this knowledge, because each year we're learning more. We must move from project to project to the systems level transformation. We will not address this on single investments. So it means embedding resilience not only in infrastructure design, but into national energy planning, regulatory frameworks, investment criteria, and the operation and maintenance regimes. And I think the point also is that we must get this into the universities and the technical institutes. We cannot have the next generation coming out into the workforce with standards and expertise for the past. And third, we must deepen our partnerships. So no single institution, sector, or country can tackle this alone. We should work together to build resilient energy systems. ADB and the other multilateral development banks, we have a key role to play in shaping and promoting climate resilient infrastructure standards that guide planning and implementation of resilient energy systems. And here at ADB, particularly under Orgo's leadership, we are very eager to foster collective actions in this area by advancing an initiative on climate resilient infrastructure standards together with other MDBs. So before I conclude, I would like to express my heartfelt thank you to all the speakers and moderators for their excellent contributions, and to all the participants for their active engagement and thoughtful questions, and to all the teams, particularly Jin-san and the team who've been involved in organizing the session. Please do show your appreciation. We look forward to continuing to work with you all as we move towards more resilient energy futures. Thank you very much, and it's time for lunch.